documented the sad state of sequential art in many a rip-roar and rant over the years, from reactions to Nick Spencer's ongoing war with Captain America's 5 remaining fucking readers, to Dynamite's SJW Shadow Saga that went over like an earthquake in a fucking bris, but it all pales next to the sheer strip the paint off the walls stupidity of the big two, Marvel and DC. Now, we've shared a collective gut laugh at the shattering of Marvel's glass house of ideas, but to date, DC have been mercifully unscathed, and not for lack of fucking trying. I've said since the DJ spun the first record at this propaganda party that DC Comics were actually the ones who provided the fucking keg to begin with. Back when Marvel had a modicum of a clue in the mid-aughts, DC were already giving us Batwoman, a character Dan DiDio even admitted in interviews at the time was merely an excuse to virtue signal, an vacuous grab for headline relevance, and sure enough, nearly 15 years the fuck on, she remains defined not by her broad character traits, but the fact that she's a gourmand for gash. And be honest, bitch, cool costume or no, neat J.H. Williams the Spurg artwork or otherwise, without her abiding affection for fucking Bush, Batwoman's an empty costume, an utterly one-note caricature with no real reason to exist apart from her social import. In short, DC made themselves a sapphic sequel to Green Lantern, Green Arrow, with pussy politics instead of racism as its centerpiece. And if you fail to comprehend the import of that comparison, go ahead and try to read the dated-ass dog shit that is Green Lantern, Green Arrow sometime, especially the hyper-praised space racism exchange from the fucking 70s, provided you can do so with no loaded firearms within reach. This shit has aged like Alyssa Milano in blackface, and Batwoman will be no fucking different. And now, the lady golfers have come home to roost, as DC announced some of the most sweeping layoffs in editorial since Warner Brothers bought them outright in the early 90s. A Kate Mossian purge of over 800 staffers across the entire company, the comic imprint very much included. Now, the immediate impetus is, of course, obvious. The doomed DC Universe. An app no one asked for and even fewer fucking paid for. Despite a pandemic which has delivered an audience held captive on their couches with literally nothing to do but sit on their asses and watch. The CD of the Month Club has more subscribers in 2020 than DC fucking Universe does. Oh, what's that? Cram a bunch of modern, mediocre, grimdark DC films onto an app whose primary selling point is reruns of Batman the Animated Series? At the same time, 7 trillion other services are offering more inclusive variants of the self-same fucking formula? What could possibly go wrong but absolutely everything? See also CBS All Access. Mind you, WB have been dong deep in Schitt's Creek for a fucking minute, cranking out 4 or 5 times the number of pictures in a fiscal year as Disney Films or Fox, and nevertheless boasting a fraction of their box office profits. Don't believe me? Consider that over the past several years, their biggest, loudest AAA tentpole pictures have been bona fide box office bombs like Blade Runner 2049, The Shining sequel Dr. Sleep, The Goldfinch, and fucking Justice League. Even when they trip in their own dicks and fall bass-backward into money with something like, say, Joker, they wipe it all away with some shit like Motherless Brooklyn, Shaft, or Godzilla King of the fucking Monsters. The former of which, I'd remind you, posted one of the worst opening weekends in the history of cinema.
Of all time.
But the knife will cut deep indeed, and DC Comics will not be spared, as WB have already announced severe cuts at HBO, who, like DC, also launched an unwanted streaming app in the recent past, and specifically citing DC Comics editorial as part of the corporate body count. Editor-in-Chief Bob Harris, foremost among them, meaning between the 90s and now, Bob Harris may have presided over the collapse of both of the big two comic companies, and he was in a leadership position during both. A great big goose feather in his cap for fucking sure, folks. And given that the lion's share of the 800 or so company-wide layoffs will be at WB itself, of which DC is a formal subsidiary, It's looking more and more like Dan DiDio and his penile push broom mustache picked the exact right time to gather up his gender-swapped superheroes and sally forth into the fucking sunset. Not even comics legend Jim Lee, the last remaining survivor of the Johns Lee DiDio dipshit triumvirate, was spared exsanguination here, as he's been formally demoted from the role of DC Comics publisher, which we can hope against hope will mean he'll be illustrating, but God willing not writing, some actual comics in the very near future. But for now, folks, this is the fucking future. Comics, as a physical concern, are destined for the ash heap of history. I hate to say it, and I argue vehemently that there's anything innately arcane about the printed word that would prevent comic books from existing 80 years hence. The look on my little cousin's eyes when he sees my comic collection, at which point I just lose him for hours on end as he's head over heels in a world of superheroes and pulp Avengers, is really the only argument I require about the innate appeal of comics to the younger generation. I like comics. I read comics. I've been paid to draw comics. Physical comics are not the problem. The companies that print them are. So distracted by the socio-political cause celebre or coastal commie flavor of the nanosecond, they've generated no reliable or convenient delivery system to reach those young consumers, and so they've lost them. Let's hope we don't lose the entire industry in the process, because a bunch of aging asshats with soy beards on their chins, turtlenecks on their chests, and Rogaine on their heads were too busy preaching about police brutality and pee-pee politics to find new fucking consumers. Hang in there, DC Comics. Most of your new books eat more dick than Oracle, and don't get me started on your emo fucking films, but with a new staff in possession of an actual clue, maybe one day we can see the words DC Comics without the phrase "the once great" attached. I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed. Man,